Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. My name is Tom, and I've always been someone who enjoys a good, quiet fishing trip. I'm not into the big crowds or the busy spots you see on the weekends. Those places full of loud families, kids, and people blasting music. I much prefer the solitude of a remote spot where you can fish in peace. That's exactly why I decided to take my son, Liam, on a night fishing trip a few weeks ago. It was a Friday evening, and we had the whole weekend to ourselves. So we packed up the truck with our fishing gear, a couple of lanterns, and a cooler full of snacks. The plan was simple: drive out to this old, hidden lake deep in the woods and try our luck with some catfish. It's a place not many people know about, and it's far enough from town that the only company we usually have is the sound of the water and the occasional rustling of wildlife. We drove out to the spot after dinner, leaving the house around 8 p.m. It was a dark drive, the kind where your headlights barely cut through the thick trees and the winding road seems to go on forever. Liam sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window, half dozing. The truck bounced along the dirt road, kicking up dust behind us as we slowly made our way through the woods. When we finally parked and unloaded the gear, it felt like stepping into another world. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the smell of pine and damp earth. The sky was clear, the stars shining bright above us, and the only noise we could hear was the occasional croak of a frog from the water. We walked along a narrow trail through the thick brush that led to the lake. Liam kept close by my side, carrying his own fishing pole and gear, not saying much, but you could tell he was excited. The lake is a small, still body of water. The shoreline is dotted with rocks, and the bushes and trees crowd up right to the edge, almost as if they're trying to keep the place hidden. We set up our lanterns and started baiting our hooks. It was calm, peaceful, really. We were alone out there, just father and son, enjoying the quiet night. The kind of night you can only get when you're far enough from civilization. But then, just as I was about to cast my line into the water, I heard it. A sharp, unmistakable whistle. It was high-pitched, like a bird, but different. It echoed through the trees behind us, not close, but not too far either. I glanced up, thinking maybe it was another fisherman or a hiker coming through the woods, but the whistle didn't sound like someone lost or out for a stroll. It sounded deliberate, intentional. "Did you hear that?" I asked Liam. He nodded, his eyes wide. "Yeah, what was that?" I didn't answer right away. I brushed it off. Probably just a bird or something. Maybe someone else out here. But as I cast my line into the water, the whistle came again. Closer this time. Short bursts of sound like someone was trying to get our attention. I could feel Liam tense up beside me. His fingers gripped his fishing rod a little too tight. "Just stay calm," I said, trying to reassure him, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince more, him or myself. We waited in silence for a minute, the sound of the water lapping gently at the shore filling the space. But then the whistle came again, closer, louder. It wasn't a bird. At that point, something started to itch at the back of my mind. It was a feeling. Something I couldn't quite shake off, like we weren't alone out here anymore. And then I noticed something else. Liam was staring at the trees across the water, his face pale. "Dad," he whispered, "I don't think it's a bird." The air around us felt heavier, thicker, like the woods were watching us. I forced a smile, trying to hide the unease creeping up my spine. "It's fine. Let's just move down the bank a little bit, away from whatever that is." So we packed up our gear, keeping the lanterns close as we walked further along the shore, one isn't bought, away from the direction the whistle had come from. I wasn't sure if we were being paranoid, but there was something about that sound that just didn't sit right. It didn't take long before the whistling came again. This time it was much closer, so close it was like someone was standing just behind the trees. I turned to Liam, my heart racing now. "Stay close, buddy." We hurried down the shoreline, hoping to outrun whatever was making that noise. But no matter how far we walked, the whistling followed us. It was like it was circling us, staying just out of sight, but always near. The occasional sound of brush moving or a twig snapping sent my heart into overdrive. Then, out of nowhere, a heavy rock came flying out of the darkness. It landed just a few feet from us, crashing into the ground with a force that made me jump. My first instinct was to grab Liam and get the hell out of there. "Run!" I shouted. We sprinted toward the trail, the sound of footsteps echoing behind us, but when I glanced over my shoulder, I didn't see anyone. Just the black outline of the trees against the starlit sky. But something else was wrong. The trail we'd been walking on was suddenly blocked by crude wire snares strung between trees just at head height. I barely managed to duck under one, pulling Liam with me. As we stumbled forward, I spotted something else. Sharp, jagged sticks jammed into the ground, but placed in a way that clearly wasn't natural. They were there for a reason. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just some random person or a lost hiker. Someone was deliberately trying to keep us out. And I had a horrible feeling that whoever it was had been watching us for a while. We finally reached the truck, breathless and panicked. I threw open the door and started the engine without hesitation. Liam didn't say a word, just stared out the window, his face ghostly pale. We drove away quickly, not once looking back. The next morning, I contacted the local authorities, though I felt foolish as I did it. What could we really report? A strange whistle? A rock thrown from the woods? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and I needed to know who or what we had encountered. The sheriff's deputy came out with me and Liam to the lake. We retraced our steps, following the path along the shoreline, hoping to find something that could explain the events of the night before. It didn't take long before we found the first trap. It was small, but deadly. An animal snare hidden in the brush, set up with such precision that it could have easily caught a deer or a person. The deputy immediately radioed for backup. The whole scene started to feel more and more like a setup, but we kept moving, looking for any more signs of whatever or whoever had been out there. That's when we found the hunting blind. It was crude, barely more than a few logs and some burlap hidden deep in the trees just off the trail. It was like someone had been living there, or at least spending a lot of time. But there was something else, something that sent a chill down my spine. The hunting blind wasn't abandoned. There were recent signs of use, empty cans of food scattered around, old half-burned logs in a small fire pit, and a ragged old jacket draped over a branch. Then we found something that made my blood run cold. A hunting license. The name on it wasn't familiar, but the thing that stood out was the address, one that didn't even exist. A fake name. A fake address. The deputy scowled as he pocketed the license. "We'll investigate further. This might be an illegal hunting setup, but I wouldn't bet on it." We spent hours combing the area, but there was no sign of anyone. Whoever had been there had vanished without a trace. The traps were taken down and the blind dismantled. It was like they had never existed in the first place. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. The whistle, the rock, the traps. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't about poaching. It wasn't about hunting. It was about something far darker. The police never found anyone in the woods. The case was quietly closed as an illegal hunting setup, but something in my gut told me that wasn't the truth. I knew what we experienced out there wasn't just some random poacher. Whoever or whatever was out there had been watching us, waiting. I've been fishing these parts for years, growing up in Texas, spending most of my time around the river, fishing alone. There's a certain peace to it. It's like the river is a world all on its own, quiet and still, with only the sounds of nature to keep you company. The stretch I like to fish is tucked away just outside the state park, and honestly, it's pretty much untouched. It's one of those places you can disappear to when you want a little solitude. There's a big stretch of mesquite trees, thick cedar, and bushes along the banks, and a few old trails that barely anyone uses. In the late afternoon, you can see the sun creeping down through the leaves and hitting the water just right, casting these long, golden rays over the surface. Perfect for an evening of fishing. I went out there one fall evening a few years back, just as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. Had a cooler with some drinks, a folding chair, and, of course, my fishing rod. The plan was to set up for the night. There's nothing better than sitting out by the water as the stars start to come out, listening to the sounds of the forest, and waiting for that tug on the line. It was just me and the river, no rush, no one else around. It's the kind of place where you can forget everything else. I walked along the bank to find the perfect spot, a place where the fish tend to hang around. It's a little overgrown, but that's what I like about it. Nobody else bothers with it. There's a small trail that cuts through the brush leading to a spot I like, but when I was walking along, I noticed something strange off to the side. It was hidden behind some thick bushes and brush, almost like it didn't belong there. At first, I thought it was just an abandoned camp or something. Lots of homeless folks around here sometimes, especially after a weekend when they get lost in the woods. But as I took a few more steps toward it, I realized it was more unsettling. I stopped just a few feet away from the structure. It was made of sticks, tarps, and a few old blankets, kind of sloppily thrown together like someone was trying to hide it. At first glance, it didn't seem too odd, but something felt wrong. As I got closer, I noticed more details that gave me a bad feeling. There were piles of empty liquor bottles scattered around, some of them broken. A cracked lantern was tipped over on its side, and an old moldy mattress was thrown in the middle of the mess like it had been left in a hurry. And then, right there, in the middle of it all, was a rusted fishing pole stuck into the ground like it had been jammed there. The thing that really made my stomach drop, though, was the hatchet. It was stuck into a tree stump, blade first, like someone had just left it there. I don't know why, but I felt a deep, uncomfortable knot in my stomach, like I was intruding on something I shouldn't be. It felt like someone had left in a hurry, or maybe they were still around. I backed away from the spot, deciding to head back to my main fishing spot. My heart rate was a little faster than usual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The evening crept in, and the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the riverbank in deep shadows. I set up my chair, laid out my gear, and cast my line out into the water, watching the bobber float motionless. The sound of crickets started filling the air, mixed with the occasional croak of a frog. It was the kind of quiet that you could feel in your bones, and I wasn't complaining. I was used to being alone out here, just me and the river, the night settling around me. But then, the quiet started to feel wrong. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe an animal rustling through the brush. But then I heard it, the distinct crack of branches behind me. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of someone moving through the trees. I stood up slowly, my eyes scanning the woods behind me. The sounds of the river, the croaks of the frogs, and the chirps of the insects were all drowned out now by the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably just a hiker or someone else out here. But the more I tried to convince myself of that, the more uneasy I became. From the thick darkness of the woods, a figure emerged. A man, maybe in his mid-40s, scraggly gray beard, thin, with clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He wore a torn, black coat that hung off him like it was too big, and his eyes were wide open but glazed, distant. He was staring at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking at me, not just glancing. I tried to ignore it, told myself he was just another guy passing through. But then I saw it. In his right hand, he was holding something I'd just seen. The hatchet. It was the same hatchet that had been stuck in the tree stump back at the camp. It looked old and rusty, but the handle was wrapped in a piece of cloth like he was trying to make it easier to hold. He didn't say anything, didn't make a sound, just stood there, staring at me, his face expressionless. I opened my mouth, not sure what to say, but I managed to get a few words out. "Hey, I'm just fishing, man. Everything's fine. I'll be on my way in a bit." He didn't respond. He just started walking toward me. Slow, deliberate. Each step was calculated as if he had all the time in the world, but I didn't feel like I had much time. I took a few steps backward, trying to stay calm. My hand gripped the fishing rod tightly, as if it might somehow offer some protection. "Hey," I said, voice shaking, trying to sound confident. "I don't want any trouble, just here to fish." But he didn't stop. His eyes were locked on me, and every step he took was another knot in my stomach. I could feel my pulse quickening. There was something about him, something in his eyes, that made me feel like I was standing in front of a predator. I couldn't just stand there. I couldn't wait for whatever he was planning to happen. Without thinking, I grabbed my cooler, my tackle box, and everything else I could carry, and I ran. I don't know how long I ran for, but everything around me was a blur. My legs were burning, and my breath was coming in ragged gasps. Branches whipped against my arms and face as I tore through the trees, not stopping to look behind me, not slowing down for anything. I just had to get to the trail, the main trail, where the park rangers passed through, where I knew there were people. I didn't hear him following me, but I felt him. I could almost hear the sound of his heavy, deliberate footsteps behind me, even though I knew better than to look back. I couldn't shake the image of his hollow eyes staring at me, the way he moved like he wasn't in any hurry. Finally, I reached the trail. I slowed down, gasping for air, my mind racing. I looked behind me, but there was nothing. No sign of the man, no sign of anyone else, just the empty, quiet woods. I didn't call the cops. What was I going to say? That a strange man with a hatchet had appeared out of nowhere and walked toward me? There was no physical attack, no actual crime. I never went back to that spot, not once. I couldn't. But that feeling, it stayed with me. The sense that something was wrong, that I had barely escaped whatever it was. It was early spring, and the heat in the city was already creeping in. I needed a break from all of it. The constant noise, the traffic, the people, everything. I loaded my kayak into the back of my truck and drove for about 2 hours northeast toward a remote part of East Texas. I'd been here before, a small stretch of river near the Sam Houston National Forest. It's a quiet place. So quiet that, outside of a few locals who know the area, nobody ever really visits. I found a small hidden access point where the trees seemed to grow over the water like a canopy. The fog hadn't fully lifted yet, and the mist clung to the surface of the river, making everything feel eerie, like I was stepping into another world. The cypress trees were thick here, their gnarled roots dipping into the water, their long moss hanging down like pale, ghostly hair. It was a place where the earth was old, untouched, and a little bit dangerous in a way that you can't quite explain. I set up my kayak at the edge of the river. The only sounds around me were the gentle rustling of the leaves and the occasional bird call. It was still early, around 6:30 a.m., and the sun hadn't quite broken through the fog yet. The water was calm, undisturbed, like a mirror that reflected everything around it, creating an eerie stillness. I pushed off from the shore and started paddling, the movement of my oars cutting through the silence. I'd been to this part of the river a few times before, always alone, and I liked it that way. There's something calming about being out in the middle of nowhere with only the river and the trees as company. As I drifted deeper into the bend of the river, the sounds of civilization, cars, people, and all the noise that comes with it, faded completely. All that was left was the soft splash of water, the faint hum of the forest, and the sound of my own breathing. The further I went, the more isolated I felt. It was the perfect place for fishing, though. Calm waters, peaceful surroundings, and no one around to bother me. I had all day to myself. As I reached a narrow stretch of river, I found a good spot to drop my line in the water. I tied a lure onto my rod, letting the current pull the bait gently downstream. Sitting back in the kayak, I let the serenity of the place wash over me. The air was cool, the water smooth, and everything felt so still. But then, after a couple of hours of waiting, something caught my eye. It was on the opposite bank, tucked between the trees. At first, I thought it was just some wildlife, but as I focused on it, I realized it was a person, standing completely still. I squinted, trying to make out the details through the mist. At first, it looked like someone was just hiking, or maybe fishing as well, but then I saw something that made my stomach drop. The person was wearing a long black robe. It looked old, worn even, and the robe had some kind of strange red symbol stitched onto the chest. I couldn't make out the exact shape from this distance, but it looked like some kind of jagged circle, like a broken ring or something that had been slashed through. I waved, thinking maybe it was just someone else out here. But he didn't wave back. He didn't move at all. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't look away. There was something about it that felt off, like my gut was screaming at me to get out of there. Yet I couldn't bring myself to paddle away. I'd been in places like this before, and usually seeing another person was a good thing. Maybe it was a fellow fisherman. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I paddled a little closer, keeping my distance, but getting close enough to see more clearly. The figure still didn't move. That's when I noticed the mask. It was a wooden mask, rough and handmade, painted bone white with jagged black streaks over the eyes and mouth. The mask was smooth, but something about it felt unnatural. It wasn't just the way it looked, it was the way the figure was standing, completely unmoving, just staring at me with no expression. I tried to call out, but the words stuck in my throat. But then the figure screamed. It wasn't like a human scream. It was more like an animal's cry, raw and deep, the kind of scream that made your skin crawl. It vibrated through my chest, and my whole body froze for a split second. At that moment, I saw something else. From behind the figure, more shapes emerged from the shadows of the trees. 4 more people, same robes, same masks. They just stood there in a line, staring across the river at me. I felt my heartbeat thud in my chest. It wasn't right. This wasn't some regular hike. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I wasn't supposed to be seeing this. I immediately turned the kayak around, my hands shaking as I tried to paddle faster. I looked over my shoulder, panic surging, but the figures hadn't moved. They just stood there, unmoving, staring. I paddled harder, my heart racing, my breath coming faster. The scream echoed in my ears as I pushed my kayak as fast as I could. But even as I raced down the river, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't look back until I was well past the bend, my arms sore from paddling so quickly. The fog had started to lift, and I could see the trees opening up in the distance. That's when I heard the rustling behind me. I didn't dare turn around. I just kept paddling, my mind whirling with questions. Who were they? What did they want? When I finally made it back to the small access point where I had launched, my hands were still shaking, and my chest was tight with anxiety. I didn't even bother to pack up my gear properly. I just shoved everything into the truck, slammed the tailgate, and drove straight to the nearest sheriff's office. I didn't care if I looked like a maniac. I had to tell someone what I saw. I rushed into the station, barely able to catch my breath, and explained everything I'd just experienced. The deputies looked at each other, confused, as I described the figures in the black robes, the wooden masks, and the strange symbol. After a couple of minutes of silence, one of the deputies spoke. "We'll send a couple guys out there to check things out," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll bring some dogs and check the area. But I gotta tell you, it sounds like a bunch of pranksters, maybe some local cult or something. It's not the first time we've had weird reports from out there." I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. I knew what I saw. I wasn't making this up. They told me to go home and wait for their call. Hours passed. I tried to relax, but my nerves wouldn't settle. I couldn't stop replaying what had happened. The scream, the masks. I had never been so terrified in my life. The deputies finally called. They told me they couldn't find anything. No signs of anyone in the area, no tracks, no signs of the robes or the symbols. Nothing. They chalked it up to a prank. They said I probably just saw some people out there in costumes, like trying to mess with me. A local cult, they said, trying to spook people off the river. But I know what I saw. I'm sure of it. I'll never go back to that part of the river again. Never. I can't shake the image of those people standing there staring at me in silence, and I still hear that scream in my nightmares. Whatever they were, they weren't meant to be seen. My name's Tyler. I'm 22 years old in my senior year at UT Dallas, studying mechanical engineering. The semester had been brutal. Midterms, projects, and interviews for internships that all blurred together in my head like TV static. I wasn't eating right. I wasn't sleeping. My eye had this twitch that just wouldn't stop. One day, after bombing a design exam I thought I was ready for, I just snapped. Not in some dramatic way, but like, I got back to the apartment, dropped my bag, looked around, and thought, if I don't get out of here, I'm gonna lose it. That night, I texted my roommate. He was already back home in Fort Worth and said I was heading out for a few days. He didn't ask questions. We aren't that close. I grabbed my fishing pole, tent, old sleeping bag, and a cheap foam pad I bought off Amazon. No big gear, just enough to get by. I loaded everything into my old Silverado and pointed it northwest. I was thinking about this lake my uncle had taken me to once when I was maybe 10 or 11. He used to hunt deer out there before it got too damn developed, in his words. All I remembered was that it was near Amarillo, tucked into a bend of nothing but forest and ranch land. No trail markers, no cell phone towers, no reception. It sounded perfect. It took me about 8.5 hours to get there. Last hour of the drive was all dirt roads and bumping over tree roots. I passed a rusted gate and a crooked wooden sign that was too faded to read. After that, it was just silence and that dry West Texas breeze that smells like dust and pine needles. My GPS had stopped working hours ago. Good thing I had printed directions from an old forum thread someone posted about secret fishing holes. I parked beneath some scrubby oaks, close enough to the water I could hear it slapping the shore in little rhythms. I remember stepping out of the truck and just standing there, letting the quiet settle in my chest. The lake was smaller than I remembered, maybe 1.5 miles across. The far side was lined with dead trees, half sunken in the water like skeletons. The bank on my side was rocky and uneven, but I found a little patch of flat dirt tucked into some brush where I could pitch my tent. No trash, no broken beer bottles, just earth. I set up camp slow. I wasn't in a rush, just moving in silence, listening to the birds. The sky was turning that late afternoon orange. I built a little fire pit with rocks, collected some twigs, lit it up with my cheap lighter, and made a little dinner. Canned chili straight from the can with a spoon, washed down with a warm sheener I'd brought from the gas station. That first night, everything felt right. I didn't check my phone once. I just sat in a folding chair by the fire, watching the shadows creep across the water, listening to the fire crackle and pop. I remember laying back and staring at the sky. When I finally crawled into my tent, it was close to midnight. I unzipped the flap, took off my boots, and slid into my sleeping bag. The ground was a little lumpy, but I didn't care. A breeze pushed against the tent wall now and then. It was kind of perfect. I must have fallen asleep within minutes. Sometime in the night, no idea what time, I woke up. Not suddenly, not like a jump scare or anything. Just awareness. My eyes opened in the dark, and I knew something wasn't right. I heard footsteps outside, not loud, just soft, crunching against dry leaves and twigs. One step, then another, then silence. I lay still. My breathing felt loud in my ears. I told myself it was an armadillo, maybe a deer. Eventually, I must have drifted off again. In the morning, I climbed out and stretched my legs. Tried to laugh it off, but I noticed something weird right away. My cooler, the soft one with the zipper, I always close it after dinner. I know I did the night before, but now it was halfway open. Nothing missing, just unzipped, like someone looked inside. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, trying to think of a logical reason. Maybe the zipper worked itself loose. Maybe a raccoon tugged at it. I pushed the thought down, made some instant coffee with my camp stove, and sat by the lake with my fishing rod, pretending I was okay. The second day went by slow. I caught a couple of smallmouth bass and threw them back. Cooked a can of ravioli and read a beat-up paperback I brought, Pet Cemetery. Bad choice, in hindsight. But I couldn't shake this tension. It was like something was just out of view, watching me. You ever feel that prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you know someone's staring? It felt like that all day. Every time I turned around, I expected to see someone ducking behind a tree. That night, I stayed up longer. I let the fire burn higher, kept my headlamp on. At around 10, I went down to the water just to walk a bit, stretch my legs. It was cool out, quiet. When I turned around to head back to the tent, I stopped in my tracks. There were footprints, fresh ones. Big. They were on the far side of the tent, in the soft dirt. Not mine. They were too big. And deep. Whoever made them was heavy. The tracks led toward my tent, stopped just behind it, and then vanished. No returning steps. I crouched and stared at them, comparing them to my own boot prints. My stomach was doing somersaults. I didn't know what to do. Leave? Drive back in the dark over unfamiliar roads? Or wait until morning? I stayed. But I slept with my knife in my sleeping bag, clutching it so tight my fingers ached. At some point, probably around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. Breathing. Not mine. Outside the tent. Heavy, slow, ragged breathing. Like someone standing just inches away, exhaling through their nose. I didn't move. Not a muscle. I was sweating. My fingers were numb from gripping the knife. The breathing kept going, steady, deliberate. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I didn't move. Then it stopped. And I stayed frozen, counting seconds in my head. Listening. After what felt like forever, I must have passed out from sheer fear. Or maybe I dissociated. I honestly don't remember falling asleep. In the morning, I didn't pack up. I ran. I grabbed the bare essentials, threw them in my bag, and hiked a half-mile down the shore to find a new spot. Somewhere more covered, more hidden. I told myself it was probably a vagrant, some sick prank. I didn't even eat dinner that night. I just sat inside my tent with the flap zipped up, knife in hand, heart pounding every time a branch snapped or an owl called out. Then, at around 2:30 a.m., I heard a zipper. Not mine. From the trees behind my camp, it was quiet but clear, like someone unzipping a bag or a tent. My body went cold. Then, slowly, a blade tore through the side of my tent. Not fast, not aggressive, slow. A slice, maybe 6 inches long, peeling the nylon right by my head. That was it. I grabbed my flashlight, kicked through the side of the tent, and ran barefoot through the trees. Branches whipped my face, rocks stabbed my heels. I didn't care. I ran all the way to my truck, fumbled with the keys, peeled out down the dirt road, and didn't stop until I hit pavement and bars came back on my phone. I called the sheriff's office, told them everything. They told me to come in. I barely remembered the drive. They took it seriously. They sent a deputy and a game warden out that same morning. I stayed behind, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine and trying not to shake. They found a second camp about a mile deeper in, hidden under camo netting. Real professional stuff. Inside, a tarp shelter, gear, empty cans, water bottles, and crates. Inside the crates, photographs. Dozens of them, some old curling at the edges, all taken with a zoom lens, all of people, campers, families, kids, couples, men fishing, women sunbathing, all taken without them knowing, and one of them was me, asleep in my tent, taken the night before the knife. They never caught him. The prints vanished into the woods. No fingerprints. The site looked recently used. The fire pit was still warm underneath. I haven't been camping since. I won't go near woods alone. I sleep with the light on most nights. And I don't know what's worse, knowing someone was watching me for days or knowing I almost didn't leave. Because whoever he wasn't just watching. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.